Tonight, as we come on the air, Russia ready for war, but leaders around the globe tonight trying to stop an invasion. As U.S. troops arrive in Europe to assist NATO allies, President Biden sat down with the new chancellor of Germany. The president threatening major economic sanctions if Russia invades. This as Vladimir Putin met face-to-face with French President Emmanuel Macron. And in Ukraine, civilians now preparing for battle. Our Richard Engel is there, and former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, William Taylor, joins Top Story Live. Also tonight, state of emergency protests over vaccine mandates crippling Canada's capital city. Thousands of truckers blocking roads for more than a week and refusing to leave until their demands are met. Could it impact the already fragile supply chain here at home? Plus, the deadly supermarket shooting, a gunman opening fire inside a grocery store in Washington state. The all-out manhunt launched for the suspect. Stacey Abrams under fire after she was photographed maskless around a group of school children. The swift backlash from her political opponents and her response tonight. Joe Rogan outrage, a social media video showing the popular podcast host using a racial slur nearly 24 times and making offensive comments about black neighborhoods. What Spotify CEO is saying as more artists part ways with the platform over Rogan's remarks. And Queen Camilla, the surprising announcement from Queen Elizabeth about her daughter-in-law as the 95-year-old monarch marks 7 decades on the throne. Top Story starts right now. And good evening. Welcome to Top Story. Can world leaders stop Vladimir Putin? That's the big question tonight, as there is a full court press at the White House and the Kremlin. We start Top Story with these images. American troops arriving in Poland to assist its NATO allies, as U.S. officials warn Russia has amassed 70% of the forces it would need to invade its neighbor. At the White House, President Biden sitting down with the new chancellor of Germany. Biden, even though he has no direct authority on the project, threatening to shut down a crucial European gas pipeline that runs from Russia to Germany if Putin invades. And in Moscow, French President Emmanuel Macron meeting face-to-face with Putin, who has repeatedly denied he is planning such an attack. At the center of all of this is Ukraine, now preparing for war. Even civilians learning to handle weapons, administer first aid, and evacuate the wounded. Richard Engel is there again for us tonight and leads us off.
A senior Western intelligence official tells NBC News tonight that Russia's troop buildup around Ukraine is not slowing down. And that with each passing day, the chances of a Russian invasion go up. The scope of what Russia may do, however, remains unclear. From seizing a pocket in eastern Ukraine to a total invasion from all sides. We ask soldiers today on the front line.
How could you defend against a massive Russian invasion? You have what look like ancient trenches here.
Our trenches just look ancient, but in the trenches we are hidden, so we are ready to strike back enemy forces.
French President Macron in Moscow today pushing diplomacy with President Putin, who again said he would not invade and praised some of Macron's proposals. While President Biden met with Germany's new chancellor, trying to smooth over divisions within NATO. Germany has so far been reluctant to define sanctions against Russia or send weapons to Ukraine.
Germany's completely reliable, completely, totally, thoroughly reliable. I have no doubt about Germany at all.
And Tom, while the entire world is watching what's happening around Ukraine's borders, there is another dynamic at play inside the country. A senior Western intelligence official told me tonight that Russian agents have tried 3 times since January to carry out attacks or start riots to create instability. The goal to topple the government of President Zelensky and make this country a client Russian state. All 3 of those attacks were thwarted, and that now Western intelligence agencies are helping Zelensky's government look out for internal threats. Tom?
The chaos could start even before the invasion. All right, Richard, thank you. With President Biden saying that the U.S. hopes to continue diplomatic talks with Russia, I want to bring in former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, William Taylor. He served under President George W. Bush and again in the Trump administration. He's currently the vice president for Ukraine and Europe at the U.S. Institute of Peace. Ambassador, thank you for joining Top Story tonight. I'd like to dissect some of these headlines today with you. President Biden joined there with the German chancellor saying they are united and NATO, quote, quote, is ready. What exactly does that mean if Russia invades Ukraine? What exactly is NATO ready to do if they're not entering this conflict ready for combat?
Tom, NATO is ready to provide additional assistance and indeed accelerate assistance to Ukraine to help them defend against that invasion that you talked about. The United States is also ready and has already begun to move troops from the United States into Eastern European allies, NATO allies, so that they are reinforced on the eastern flank of NATO. And NATO, EU, the world is ready to put very harsh sanctions on Russia if Mr. Putin makes a bad decision to invade Ukraine.
NBC News learned over the weekend of a U.S. intelligence report that concluded up to 50,000 civilians could be killed or wounded within weeks of a full-scale invasion. You're an expert on Ukraine. Tell us about the Ukrainians. Will they stand up and fight, and will they fight to their death?
Tom, they absolutely will. Your reporter, Richard, interviewed one of the soldiers, but I've talked to soldiers as well as civilians. I was just there last week, and several of the people that I talked to were adamant, were fiercely ready to fight, and they said they went down to the local gun store. They were surprised at the number of people buying weapons. The people are not panicking, Tom. The people are not panicking. I understand that kind of the signal when people start to worry that commodities are not going to be available. Salt gets short, and people buy the salt. Well, the salt's still on the shelves. What's not on the shelves? Bullets. So the Ukrainians are buying weapons, and they are ready to fight. They will fight fiercely, as you said, to the death.
Ambassador, since you mentioned you were just there last week, I have to ask you, what is your sense of what's going to happen here? You know all the players, including Russia. Do you think they sack Kiev? Do you think they take Kiev over several days?
Tom, I think President Putin, who's the only one who can really answer this question, I think he's not made up his mind. He knows all of the things that you and I just talked about. The number of civilians killed, this is mind-boggling. Here we are in this time. We're talking about 50,000 people killed. This could be a war crime. This is one of the things that he has to keep in mind. He knows the sanctions. He knows the opprobrium. He couldn't even get the Chinese to say the word Ukraine. He's not on solid ground, so he may not have made up his mind yet. And what that means is that we can still deter him. What that means is he can still decide to negotiate rather than invade.
Ambassador, finally, we heard President Biden today speaking there with the German chancellor about the pipeline running from Russia to Germany. And even though he has no sort of direct authority over it, saying they would cancel that, do you think that threat is enough to stop Vladimir Putin?
That's one of the threats that President Putin will have to be thinking about, and President Biden actually does have some ability to shut down that pipeline. The Germans have the direct ability to shut down that pipeline.
Yeah, it's the Germans' call. It's not President Biden's call. It's the Germans' call. But obviously, that's what was likely discussed.
That was discussed, but also President Biden waived some sanctions that allowed that pipeline to go forward, and he can make a different decision, and he can shut that down.
Ambassador, we thank you for your analysis and your time. We will invite you back on Top Story. Thank you. All right, we want to take you now to Canada, where the mayor of Ottawa has declared a state of emergency. More than 1,000 truckers have paralyzed traffic and shut down the city center, protesting vaccine mandates. The protest has lasted days, crippling Canada's capital, and it's now spreading to other cities. Here's NBC's Miguel Almaguer.
The ear-piercing protests snarling streets with big rigs as demonstrators demand an end to the country's mandatory vaccine requirement for truckers crossing the U.S.-Canadian border. Dubbed the Freedom Convoy, the movement is being called an insurrection by some, paralyzing the Canadian capital.
No one's here to hurt anything. We're just here to be heard.
The Canadian Trucking Alliance estimates just 10% of cross-border truckers are unvaccinated. In a blow to protesters, one source of funding has been cut off after GoFundMe said they'll return $9 million in donations, citing unlawful activity.
We are turning up the heat in every way we possibly can within our operations and enforcement.
Today, a Canadian judge signed an injunction to stop incessant honking as diesel fumes frustrate residents and shop owners alike.
It's difficult to breathe. You can't hear yourself think after an hour. The headache is excruciating.
The 11-day protest now declared a state of emergency, with much of the city locked down in a blanket of gridlock. The mayor now asking for 2,000 additional police officers.
What was initially described as a peaceful protest has now turned into a siege of our downtown area.
With reports of protests turning violent, Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says there's no plan for now to call in the military to clear the streets.
We're gonna end these mandates. We're gonna end these lockdowns.
Sarah Chowan's restaurant is empty. The unprecedented occupation of Ottawa has a stranglehold on the economy.
People are struggling to pay their bills, pay their rent. They're begging to come in for work, but there's simply no work to be had right now.
Miguel Almaguer, NBC News.
All right, we thank Miguel for that. We want to turn now to Minneapolis, where protests continue over the police shooting of Amir Locke. New details about that no-knock warrant amid calls for Minneapolis's acting police chief to resign. Shaq Brewster has the latest and a warning. Some of the footage you're about to see may be disturbing.
Tonight, the outpouring of anger and frustration continues.
These men that you took from us, our children that you took from us, they had people that loved them too. That's right.
A weekend of protests after Minneapolis police shot and killed 22-year-old Amir Locke last Wednesday, entering an apartment on a no-knock warrant that police say Locke wasn't the target of. Officers saw a gun and they fired. The family says Locke had a license and a concealed carry permit for that gun, and that he had it for protection for his job as a delivery driver.
Put yourselves in our shoes.
The parents of Amir Locke speaking out.
Never would I have imagined that I would be standing up here talking about the execution of my son by the Minneapolis Police Department.
Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey ordering a moratorium on no-knock warrants as the city looks at changing its policy.
It shouldn't take a tragedy to bring us to this point.
But protesters are calling on the mayor to do more.
It is time for interim police chief Huffman to go.
And Judge Peter Cahill, who gained national attention last year as the judge in the Derek Chauvin trial, is also in the spotlight tonight. Cahill likely reviewed and signed off on that no-knock warrant based on the application schedule from the Hennepin County District Court. Even as questions remain about the execution of the warrant and the moments leading up to Locke's death, the family remembering Amir as a young man with dreams of a music career.
Amir was a bright light, and he deserves to be able to shine.
The officer who shot Locke, Mark Hanneman, has been placed on administrative leave as per the department policy. And the investigation into Locke's shooting continues tonight. We know that this is being led by the county attorney in conjunction with the state's attorney general, Keith Ellison. Those two will be responsible for any charging decision if one is to come. Meanwhile, the pressure from the outside continues to grow. Tomorrow, a student walkout is planned. Tom?
All right, Shaq, thank you for that. Next tonight, several states announcing they are lifting school mask mandates, signaling a shift towards treating the coronavirus as part of daily life as Omicron cases drop. Gabe Gutierrez has more.
Today, New Jersey, Connecticut, and Delaware all announcing plans to lift school mask mandates.
This is a huge step back to normalcy.
Just outside Cleveland, Troy Intermediate School no longer requires masks in class, only recommends them.
How effective has mask wearing been?
I think it's been very, very effective.
Of its 550 students, 83 have tested positive this school year. Staffing issues also forced the school to close in December during the Omicron surge when masks were optional.
We're at the point where we feel like we've got to learn how to live with this.
Just 35 miles away, Warrensville Heights Elementary has kept its mask mandate. Of its 890 students, 31 have tested positive this school year. It has not closed due to an outbreak.
Our community believes that wearing masks is a barrier to try to prevent the spread.
Nationwide, more than 60% of the 500 largest school districts still require masks, though data on how effective they are in preventing outbreaks in schools is limited. One survey conducted by the CDC of 169 schools in Georgia found those with a mask requirement had 21% fewer COVID cases than schools where masks were optional. Another study in Arizona found schools were 3.5 times more likely to experience a COVID outbreak if they did not have a mask requirement. But the methodology of those studies has been questioned.
We don't have very convincing studies that masks have a large impact on preventing either transmission of disease within the school setting.
There's also a lack of data on the downsides of wearing masks in schools.
The biggest downside to wearing masks in school is the mental and social aspects.
Some parents argue it should be their choice.
Children's languages are developing at a young age, and if we mask them at age 2 and they're not seeing the mouths move, then some of that can cause some developmental delays.
But for others, the pros outweigh any cons.
I think they should be wearing masks. A lot of parents have the opportunity to get COVID vaccinations for their kids, and a lot of them do not.
It's a tough decision to make for any parent. But at the end of the day, if it's keeping our children safe.
All right, Gabe joins us now just outside of Cleveland from one of those elementary schools where he was speaking to parents. And Gabe, did you get an overall sense? I know you spoke to a couple parents. We saw that there in the story, but I'm curious if you got an overall sense if parents were happy with the decisions to remove the masks.
Oh, well, Tom, many of the parents we spoke with were really amazed that nearly 2 years into the pandemic, we were still discussing this topic. But, one of the school behind me still has its mask mandate, and many of the parents we spoke with were happy that it was still in effect. The other school districts, some of those parents, masks were optional there, but they were glad that the school has had it on and off, and they were glad that the mask mandates were, still encouraged, recommended, and they felt that they were needed to prevent, schools, to prevent students from getting infected and from transmitting it outside of the school. But there were other parents, Tom, that they just don't like the idea of school districts and the government forcing their kids to wear masks inside these schools. So even 2 years into this pandemic, Tom, still extremely divisive.
Yeah, a range of opinions. And Gabe, I also know you have some new reporting. What's the Biden administration saying about the multiple states dropping their mask mandates in schools?
Yeah, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki was asked about this today, and she says that it is still the administration's recommendation that masks be worn universally in schools, but that ultimately, Tom, it's up to local school districts to decide what to do. Tom?
All right, Gabe Gutierrez is there with us tonight. Gabe, thank you. Now, this weekend, Georgia gubernatorial candidate Stacey Abrams becoming the latest public figure to be ensnared in the masking controversy. The voting rights advocate and prominent Democrat caught taking pictures without a mask on at an event with students. Abrams now defending herself as her Republican opponents take aim. Priscilla Thompson has more.
Tonight, Stacey Abrams under fire after a photo showed the gubernatorial candidate maskless among a group of masked school children.
It's yet another case of do as I say, not as I do, my favorite story of the weekend.
Republicans now calling the prominent Georgia Democrat and strong supporter of masking in schools a hypocrite.
It doesn't matter if you are Republican, Democrat, parents are pissed off at the COVID hypocrisy.
The photos taken at a Black History Month event Friday were first tweeted by the principal at Glenwood Elementary School in Decatur, Georgia. Abrams later quoted the tweet, thanking the school for hosting her. Both tweets have now been deleted, even as Abrams defends her actions. Stacey trusts science and supports masking in schools, her campaign manager wrote on Twitter. She wore a mask to the event and removed it at the podium so she could be heard by students watching remotely and for photos, but only with folks who were masked. The photos prompted fierce backlash online. Republican Governor Brian Kemp, who Abrams narrowly lost the governorship to in 2018, tweeting, Stacey Abrams wants state government mask mandates for Georgians and their children, but it looks like they wouldn't apply when she's attending a photo op. Kemp's communication director vowing to use the photos in political ads leading up to the midterm election. Former Republican Senator David Perdue, who's also running for governor, has added the photo to his Twitter profile with the tagline, Unmask Our Kids. Abrams isn't the only Democratic leader whose masking has come under scrutiny. New York Representative Jamal Bowman was criticized for a photo showing him with a group of high school students, all masked except for Bowman. How much do incidents like this hurt Democrats in the eyes of the American people?
This is what has gotten people kind of exhausted with the politics of the pandemic, is that lack of consistency. And that's what's hurting Democrats right now.
All right, Priscilla joins us now live in studio. So we're talking about the big picture here. Let's go back down to Georgia. I know you've done a lot of reporting there. You were there during the election and after as well. I want to ask you, what are voters saying there about this, about taking these photos without the mask on?
Yeah, well, Republican voters are certainly up in arms about it, but those are likely folks who were never going to vote for Stacey Abrams. I spoke to one Democratic voter who called it a, quote, poor choice, but the handful of other Democratic voters I spoke to and that voter say they still plan to cast that ballot for Stacey Abrams. So I think that there's no question this will come up in debates and in political ads leading up to Election Day. And it's really going to be interesting to see what impact it could have on undecided voters.
All right, back now on Top Story. The Joe Rogan Spotify saga continues. The popular podcast host under fire after video surfaced showing Rogan using the N-word in multiple show episodes. Now more artists are calling on Spotify to take action. NBC's Clay Esamwa has more.
Tonight, outrage is growing in the Joe Rogan Spotify controversy. Grammy Award-winning singer India Ari releasing this message, followed by clips of Rogan on Friday.
Hey, y'all. I want to leave a short message here about why I decided to ask my music be pulled off of Spotify. So check this out.
It starts calling word. There should be a word like, especially like the word, that's our.
The video compilation shows the popular podcast host saying the N-word on his show at least 22 times during multiple episodes. In one video, Rogan appears to be comparing a black neighborhood to the film Planet of the Apes.
We walk into Planet of the Apes. We walked into Africa, dude. We walked in the door and there was no white people.
I want to be clear, in no uncertain terms, where I stand on this is that he shouldn't even be uttering the word. Don't even say it under any context.
Rogan responded to the backlash Saturday.
I know that to most people, there's no context where a white person is ever allowed to say that word, never mind publicly on a podcast. And I agree with that now. I haven't said it in years.
He shared a nearly 6-minute apology video on Instagram, saying in part, quote, "It's not my word to use. I'm well aware of that now." Rogan also further explained his Planet of the Apes comment.
I did not, nor would I ever say that black people are apes, but it sure sounded like that. And I immediately afterwards said, that's a racist thing to say.
The list of artists boycotting Spotify is growing. Many are leaving due to COVID-19 misinformation remarks on Rogan's popular podcast, The Joe Rogan Experience.
My friends who've been vaccinated want me to join the team. Like, go ahead, get the tattoo. Like, what are you saying?
Rogan's show reaches an estimated 11 million people per episode, and he has an estimated $100 million contract. After Rogan's apology, Spotify CEO Daniel Ek sent a letter to employees obtained by CNBC, saying in part, Rogan's remarks, quote, do not represent the values of this company. Ek added he agrees with the decision to remove past episodes with the N-word from the platform, but said, quote, I do not believe silencing Joe is the answer.
All right, Clay Esamwa joins us now live from here in 30 Rock. So, Clay, it doesn't sound like Joe Rogan is going anywhere anytime soon. What more is Spotify doing to try to fix this problem, or at least let their listeners know that they care about these issues?
Yeah, Tom, that's an important question. Obviously, this is a big PR nightmare for Spotify, and as they weigh their options, other platforms are actually stepping in. The conservative YouTube rival Rumble just today offered Rogan $100 million over 4 years in a tweet, and they actually proposed that he move his old and new shows to their platform, where his content would be, quote, not censored. And so now, is it likely that would happen? It's not really clear. And we asked Spotify for a statement. We haven't yet heard back, Tom.
Okay, Clay, we thank you for that. When we come back, the multi-state manhunt, the 3 men escaping from a Tennessee jail through an air vent, the update just in from police tonight, and the critical Senate race in Pennsylvania, the big names vying to replace retiring Senator Pat Toomey. And our Dasha Burns is in the House. After traveling to Pennsylvania, her interviews with some of the candidates, including Dr. Oz, plus some interesting straw polls, what they're showing. That's all coming up right here on Top Story. All right, back now with Top Stories newsfeed, and we begin with the manhunt after a deadly shooting at a supermarket in Washington state. Police releasing a surveillance image of the suspect. You see him there. They say he opened fire inside a Fred Meyer store in Richland. The company says at least one employee was killed. Another person is critically injured at this hour. Authorities say the suspect is considered armed and dangerous. It's unclear if the shooting was targeted. That supermarket remains closed tonight. All right, 2 of 3 inmates who escaped a Tennessee jail were found dead in North Carolina. Authorities say the 3 men, including one facing murder charges, climbed through an air vent at a jail in Sullivan County, Tennessee on Friday. Police say 2 of the men were found dead in Wilmington, North Carolina after an armed robbery and police chase. No word yet on a cause of death. Authorities are still searching for that 3rd inmate. And more than a dozen people were rescued after an ice floe broke off in Lake Erie. Take a look at this. Aerial footage shows 18 people trapped on the ice off northwest Ohio. The group was snowmobiling and riding ATVs on the lake when the piece of ice just broke away from land. The Coast Guard and one private citizen with an airboat brought them to safety. No one was injured. All right, and now for more on the growing tensions between Ukraine and Russia. Tonight we have a first-hand look at how everyday citizens are bracing for a possible invasion. Gun sales soaring across Ukraine as men, women, and even children prepare to take up arms and resist Russian forces. NBC's Aaron McLaughlin is on the ground in Kiev.
With Ukraine on the brink of war, Kyiv residents prepare for the worst. A new U.S. intel assessment is warning this city could fall in a matter of days in the event of a full-scale invasion by Russia. The potential toll is immense. 25 to 50,000 Ukrainian civilians could die, and another 1 to 5 million forced to flee their country. Now, ordinary citizens say they're prepared to do whatever it takes. This elderly man warning, if the Russians invade, he'll shoot. Putin is just a small and dumb guy in world history, he says. He has picked the wrong battlefield. Young and old gather on this cold Sunday morning, learning to handle weapons, administer first aid, and evacuate the wounded.
They're learning potentially life-saving skills. Many here say they hope it doesn't come to this, but they're prepared to defend their homeland.
Alina Ulyanova is here with her teenage sons.
Are you scared for your family? We are all mortals. Come on, we are all going to die someday, and the thing you can do is you can live your life in dignity or not.
According to one poll, half said they were ready to resist a possible Russian invasion. Ukraine's former defense minister says he believes that much resistance could be a critical deterrent, saying the Russian troops surrounding Ukraine may be enough to take a city such as Kyiv, but it's not enough to hold it.
And that's where the Russian problem is how they potentially going to keep any territories they acquire.
Small comfort to those who say they believe an invasion is inevitable. Local restaurant owner Leonid Ostaltsev fought on the front lines in eastern Ukraine, now offering free pizza to anyone who legally buys a gun to become a, quote, defender.
We understand that our neighbors are insane, and for me, invasion of Russia, it's a question only about time when it will be, but it will be.
Across the country, gun sales have skyrocketed, with the average gun costing $1,900, 3 times the typical monthly salary. 17-year-old Bagley Andriy says he's ready to pick up a weapon and fight, knowing what's at stake. For me, it means freedom, dignity. It means independence from anyone else, he says. To fight for my country, for my family, for my homeland, I'm ready to go to the very end. While the U.S. says Russia could attack at any time, Ukrainian military experts here are eyeing February 20th. That is when Russian military exercises are scheduled to conclude in Belarus. Will those forces stay or will they go? Noting that Russia could escalate the situation at any time. Tom?
Aaron McLaughlin in Kiev for us tonight. Aaron, thank you. Back here at home, we want to turn now to our new series, Power and Politics, where we look at the latest developments in the world of politics. Competition is heating up in Pennsylvania in the high-stakes race to replace retiring GOP Senator Pat Toomey. The crowded field has big names and big money. NBC's Dasha Burns has exclusive interviews from the state's Republican committee meeting this weekend.
Pennsylvania's crowded GOP Senate primary wide open as ever. Over the weekend, at a closed-door event, the state Republican Party voting not to endorse any candidates. The newest name in the race, David McCormick, flexing money, momentum, and MAGA connections.
You're, entering a new world here. I'm not in politics. It's been a new transition for me.
The former Connecticut resident, veteran, and hedge fund executive getting heat from his rivals on his Pennsylvania roots and his business dealings in China.
I've spent the majority of my life in Pennsylvania. I'm a Pennsylvania taxpayer. This is a continuation of public service to Pennsylvania and the country.
When you were at Bridgewater, do you regret some of the business you did in China? Was any of that a mistake?
No, listen, I've been blessed. And just like President Trump's experience helped him be a great president, my experience in business is something that I'm proud of. I want to make sure that American dream that I've lived is available for them.
McCormick's big bucks brawling with a big name.
I want to know what's getting your blood pressure up.
Dr. Mehmet Oz holding a rally with locals with a focus on COVID-19.
I go and I talk to voters. The main thing I hear is I know who Dr. Oz is, but he's not from here and I don't know what he stands for. So what do you say to those voters?
I want Republican primary voters to be skeptical. Kick the tires, find out. If I agree with you on inflation, on what we've done to our schools, on the problems we're having at the border, on the risks of China.
We've spoken to multiple voters in recent days who say they are skeptical, especially of his Pennsylvania bona fides.
I was a skeptic, for sure, but he answered a lot of questions that for me were the right answers.
What were your concerns about Dr. Oz coming in?
Just maybe being a charlatan, a grifter.
Real estate developer Jeff Bartos is banking on the skeptics.
There's people parachuting into the state to run. They see huge opportunities. I'm the only candidate who's a lifelong Pennsylvanian with a proven deep love for this Commonwealth.
In straw polls held by regional Republican caucuses, Bartos outperformed his high-profile rivals. But there's also another candidate performing well in straw polls. Conservative commentator Kathy Barnett.
People are unnerved by what they have lived through. It feels very totalitarian-ish.
After losing a congressional campaign, Barnett made headlines for suing over the results of the 2020 election in the Commonwealth.
Do you believe that Joe Biden fairly and legitimately won the election?
I believe there are a number of questions.
The other candidates mainly shying away from Trump's false claims of a stolen election, but the former president still looming large in a state that helped put Biden in the White House.
Are you hoping for an endorsement from former President Trump?
We would love the former president's support.
I mean, absolutely.
If President Trump endorsed me, I'd be delighted.
All right, Dasha Burns back from Pennsylvania joins me now in studio. So, Dasha, both Dr. Oz and that hedge fund executive, David McCormick, they're getting some heat for their actual ties to Pennsylvania, correct?
Yeah, that's right. There are a lot of Pennsylvanians who have so much local pride, Tom, and that they want to make sure the candidates that they are looking at are going to fight for them. So, former hedge fund executive David McCormick, he is a Pennsylvania native. He left to go to West Point, came back, ran a business in Pittsburgh, but in recent years, he's lived in Connecticut. And when we looked at voter records, he was actually registered to vote in Connecticut as recently as 2020. His campaign tells us he's now registered in Pennsylvania. And when you look at Dr. Oz, he went to school at the University of Pennsylvania, medical school and business school there, but he has not spent a lot of his life in the state. And same for him. We looked at the voter records. He has been registered to vote in New Jersey as recently as 2020 and re-registered last year to vote in Pennsylvania. A lot of people that really want to make sure that they understand what Pennsylvania needs.
And speaking of Dr. Oz, I know you talked a little bit about the straw polls there in your story, but how is Dr. Oz doing in the polling? Because it doesn't sound like he's doing great.
Look, it's still really early, and straw polls you have to take with a grain of salt, right? The way the Republican process works, they have regional caucus meetings where Republican committee members vote on who think the best candidate is. David McCormick has been doing okay. Dr. Oz, though, has been in the single digits in most of those polls. But again, it's still early, and he has so much name recognition in the state. So we'll see where that takes him.
Dasha Burns with that in-depth reporting tonight from Pennsylvania. Dasha, thank you. We want to turn now to money talks, what consumers and investors need to know from the business world and beyond. And tonight, the growing number of hacks in the cryptocurrency space has many investors worrying how secure their investments really are. Just last week, Wormhole, a cutting-edge online platform for crypto investors, was the victim of a $320 million crypto heist. I want to bring in now CNBC senior Washington correspondent Eamon Javers, who who has done a lot of reporting on cryptocurrency. So, Eamon, I first want to ask you about these hacks, or maybe we should call them heists. How much more dangerous is your money in a crypto account than, say, in a bank in any city in America?
Oh, Tom, there's no question that it's a lot more dangerous in any kind of crypto account than it is in a bank. And that's just for one simple reason, is that the hacks that we've seen that have led to these heists are getting huge amounts of money. I mean, hundreds of millions of dollars. That $320 million heist last week was just the fourth largest heist of all time in crypto. I mean, there was one earlier this year that was, or last year, that was over $600 million. You don't see anything like that in the banking system. And of course, in the banks, you know, your money is backed up by federal insurance, by the private bank, and also by a host of regulations and rules that require that bank to have all sorts of procedures and safety mechanisms in place. Almost none of that exists on the crypto side. So you're taking on a lot of risk when you're investing in crypto, but there are ways to do it more safely.
So on that point, you know, say you're interested in Bitcoin, maybe you've bought a little Bitcoin or some other crypto. What's the safest way to protect your investment?
Well, one of the things that experts tell me is you want to use some of the platforms that have been around a little bit longer. Those are the ones that have probably gotten all the bugs out already, have been tested by hackers who've been trying to get in for a while now, and have remained secure. If that's the case, then you might say you've got a little bit less risk there. You're never going to eliminate the risk altogether, and you're certainly not going to get your crypto investments to be as safe as your money in the bank. But if you stick with some of the platforms that have been around for a while, you might have better luck.
So, Amy, you know, we are in the middle of tax season, and as I mentioned, so many people are getting into Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. And there's now a question on the basic 1040. And from what I have here, I think it reads, at any time in 2021, did you receive, sell, exchange, or otherwise dispose of any financial interest in virtual currency? So now it's in the tax forms. It's getting serious. What should investors do if they've done this? Because I know there's a lot of confusion.
Well, you have to think this through very carefully, and I'm not a tax expert. My colleague Robert Frank was actually on our air today talking about this. One of the things that he said is really important here is to bear in mind the recent IRS guidance on this, which treats these cryptocurrencies a little bit like a capital gain situation, whereas if you bought the cryptocurrency but you haven't sold it or transacted it, you might not necessarily have to disclose that to the IRS. You might be more on the hook for disclosure if you bought cryptocurrency and cashed it in for dollars, or did something like buy an NFT with it. If you transacted in that cryptocurrency, that's when you're really going to have to disclose that to the IRS. The IRS is going to view that as a gain to you and therefore a taxable event, and you have to be prepared to disclose all of that. This can be very complicated, so the advice to everybody is work with a tax professional to make sure that you're doing this the right way. You don't want historical crypto transactions to come back and bite you this year or next year or the year after that.
Eamon Javers from CNBC. Always great to have you, Eamon. We turn now to the Americas and look at what's happening in the U.S. and across Latin America. And we begin in Mexico, where authorities have dismantled a migrant camp near the U.S. border. Take a look at this. Video shows excavators and trucks clearing the makeshift camp in Tijuana. Nearly 400 migrants, including children, transferred by bus to 3 different shelters. The camp began forming shortly after President Biden's inauguration in 2021. And in Puerto Rico, dozens of schools are closed due to widespread flooding. Torrential rain submerging roads and causing several landslides across the island this weekend. One town in northern Puerto Rico recording nearly 16 inches of rain. Massive waves also hitting the island's north coast. No word yet on any injuries. All right, coming up, next in line, Queen Elizabeth celebrating the 70th anniversary of her reign with a surprise announcement. Did you hear about this? It's about her daughter-in-law, Camilla. What will happen when it's Charles's turn to ascend to the throne? Stay with us. Back now with the royal surprise from Queen Elizabeth as she marks 7 decades on the throne. The Queen with a major show of support for her daughter-in-law, Camilla, as 2 other members of the royal family are visibly absent from the historic celebration. Here's Keir Simmons with more.
Tonight, a surprise announcement on the eve of the 70th anniversary of her reign. Queen Elizabeth declaring Prince Charles's wife, Camilla, will be known as Queen Consort when he takes the throne. The Queen said in a weekend statement, When in the fullness of time, my son Charles becomes king, I know you will give him and his wife Camilla the same support that you have given me. The decision representing a new turn for Camilla. Many blamed her in part for the breakup of Charles and Diana's marriage in the 90s. Diana even referencing Camilla in an infamous 1995 interview with the BBC.
Do you think Mrs. Parker Bowles was a factor in the breakdown of your marriage?
Well, there were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded.
Charles and Camilla met in the 1970s and stayed in contact while in other marriages. Both divorced in the mid-90s. The two married in 2005 and said Camilla would not use the late Princess Diana's title, the Princess of Wales. This caused speculation that Camilla would be known as Princess Consort when Charles ascends to the throne. The Queen's Platinum Jubilee message now makes it clear she wants Camilla to eventually be addressed as Queen.
The Queen now, which is very unusual for her, has actually made an announcement that is really actually almost in a way by emotional blackmail, because she has such a high popularity amongst all the public in the UK and the Commonwealth. Now she's asking that everybody accept Camilla in the way that she has.
A spokeswoman for the couple telling NBC News they are, quote, touched and honoured by Her Majesty's words. In her Platinum Jubilee message, the Queen also reflecting on her anniversary. She's the first monarch in history to reach the historic milestone of 70 years on the throne. I hope this Jubilee will bring together families and friends, neighbours and communities after some difficult times for so many of us, she wrote in part. Messages of support came from fans around the globe. Even Chinese President Xi Jinping congratulated the monarch. Two voices largely absent, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. They have not yet spoken publicly about the significant anniversary.
It's actually rather surprising that we've heard nothing from the rather verbose Prince Harry. I don't think there's any concern that people haven't heard from Prince Harry. Probably people are thinking, oh, for once he hasn't said the wrong thing.
All right, Keir joins us now from London tonight. Now, Keir, talk to me about the timing here, right? Because the Queen's announcement comes just before the 70th anniversary of her monarchy. Why bring Camilla up during this historic celebration?
Well, Tom, as far as Prince Charles is concerned, it's been a long time coming. He's wanted this for so many years. Camilla has wanted this for so long. I think the death of Prince Philip may have changed things a little. He is thought to have not been too keen on the idea of Queen Camilla. I also think what you're seeing is the Queen put her house in order, if you like. She is moving towards a smaller group, Charles and Camilla, William and Kate. That group taking over from the Queen. Another point, though, Tom, from her statement, she seemed pretty keen to be clear that she wasn't going to be handing over the crown anytime soon.
What are your fellow countrymen, I'm curious, in the UK saying about this? Is this a decision that people are happy about? Is there still ill will because of Princess Diana?
There really is, isn't it? Incredible. There are people who have responded negatively to this. Camilla's standing is not fantastic, honestly, so I think this was a difficult decision to make, a difficult announcement to make, and people did respond exactly as you say. They don't like it, many of them, because of the death of Diana, and of course we all know, if you've watched The Crown, you know that Camilla's role in that relationship with Prince Charles and Princess Diana. But Tom, you know, on the other hand, people think time moves on. Some people are agnostic about it, I suspect. The big question, of course, will be how Charles reigns when the Queen leaves us. What will King Charles be like? We now know that he will have Queen Camilla beside him.
A major moment for that family, no doubt. All right, Keir, we thank you for that. When we come back, a message of unity. The news anchor taking an offensive call from a viewer and turning it into a celebration of culture and acceptance. Vicky Nguyen joins us after the break. All right, finally tonight, what started out as a message of division has instead sparked unity. The hashtag #VeryAsian trending on Twitter after a news viewer left a message telling a local reporter to keep her culture to herself. Here's Vicky Nguyen with a viral moment that has united people across the world and even sparked a surprise by talk show host Ellen DeGeneres.
First day of the year meal, and these foods are said to bring good health, wealth, and luck.
When NBC St. Louis news anchor Michelle Lee mentioned her family's traditional New Year's Day meal on air,
I ate dumpling soup. That's what a lot of Korean people do.
She didn't think it would prompt a viewer voicemail.
The viewer called and said that she was offended, and if a white anchor would have talked about what white people ate, then they would get fired. So it was just annoying to her that I was very Asian and that I needed to keep my Korean to myself.
She did the opposite.
Why did you decide to post it to social media?
I've had a lot of people dismiss things, but when you hear it for yourself and you hear those words and you hear the confidence in her voice and you go, holy moly.
Her post took on a life of its own, shared more than 54,000 times by celebrities and total strangers, spawning other supportive hashtags like very black and very Jewish. The backstory here, ironic.
I'm an adoptee. I'm a Missourian. I'm the child of white parents. I have a Korean family.
Last year, Lee returned to Missouri to be closer to her mom, who died a few months later.
To not really have her here has been really hard. It almost felt like divine intervention, like my mom had some sort of, signal to say, like, I see you, Michelle, and so do other people.
Lee wasn't prepared for the viral response, turning an ugly moment into a celebration of being very Asian.
I've seen more and more people feel comfortable and feel inspired to speak out about what's happening to them, the discrimination that they're feeling, but also to celebrate being a minority.
Actress Olivia Munn has been drawing attention to the racism and discrimination directed at Asian Americans since the start of the pandemic. Newly released data shows reported anti-Asian hate crimes increased 339% nationwide in 2021, compared to 124% the year before. Stop AAPI Hate recorded more than 10,000 hate incidents.
For such a long time, we've been talking about the hashtag Stop Asian Hate. How does it feel to see a new viral movement taking ownership of very Asian and celebrating being Asian American?
It brings me so much pride and joy. And I see my family and I see my friends, embracing it, allies also embracing it as well.
Joseph Canaria is on the board of Act to Change.
We are a national youth serving organization that works to combat anti-Asian racism and bullying.
Why do you think that this hashtag resonated so much, especially with younger people?
Having something that is so just easily relatable. I've seen so many different tweets, like what being very Asian means to them.
The very Asian hashtag spawned a line of merch and a surprise for Lee. She never imagined she'd be talking about that voicemail on Ellen.
The world saw it and the world stood up to it.
The host handing her a $15,000 check for the newly formed Very Asian Foundation, which is giving proceeds to organizations that educate people and combat racism. As for the viewer who called in,
she apologized and I accepted. But I definitely feel like there is still much more to be said, and we said that we would meet each other when it's COVID safe. In a way, I am really grateful for this moment.
Vicky joins us now. Vicky, Michelle has really had some time to reflect on what's happened. And I wanted to ask you because, a lot of times growing up as the son of immigrants or as an immigrant yourself, you're almost kind of taught to kind of keep your head down and just work through this. But we've seen all these attacks, especially ramp up against the Asian American community during the pandemic. And I feel moments like this with Michelle are sort of turning points, correct?
I think that's a beautiful way of putting it, Tom, and so true. She was so heartened by the response, both by the younger generation of Asian Americans, as well as people outside of this community, the allies, who were saying, it's okay. You don't have to be ashamed of being who you are. Embrace your culture. Feel like you can stand up and say, yes, I am very Asian, and I'm quite proud of it. It certainly is a turning point. And for me, it's really refreshing to report on and see people talking about this in a way that they didn't when we were growing up, Tom.
Yeah, and to call it out when it happens, not to be afraid to do that. So what's next for the Very Asian Foundation, and what can people do if they'd like to get involved or donate in any way?
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's so new right now. They're just focused on raising more money by selling their merchandise, increasing awareness with stories like this. And also, something Michelle talked about is hoping to be a resource at one point for transracial adoptees like herself, not just Asian Americans, but, when you're adopted into a culture or a family that doesn't look like yours or doesn't have the same background as yours, it can be another level of transitioning and really
learning who you are. In the meantime, though, if it's something that you want to learn more about or get involved in, there's the Asian American Foundation, there's Stop AAPI Hate. There are a lot of nonprofits out there that you can educate yourself and have these conversations with your own inner circle. Start with the people that you know, and that is a really great way to learn more.
All right, Vicki Nguyen for us tonight with a very important and also very personal story. Vicki, thank you so much for joining Top Story. We thank you for watching Top Story. I'm Tom Llamas in New York. I'll see you right back here tomorrow. Good night.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.